Listen closely. What you're feeling right now is not confusion, it's recognition. Something in your life has shifted, quietly but unmistakably, and you can't explain it to anyone without sounding strange. Doors have closed. Old versions of you no longer fit. Time feels compressed, almost watching you back. This isn't happening to you. It's happening for you. And no, you are not being tested. Tests are meant to measure the past. You are being prepared for what cannot arrive until you become someone new. If this message found you, it's because you're already inside. The preparation tests are designed to measure what already exists. They look backward. They ask you to prove what you know, what you've learned, what you can already do. Preparation, on the other hand, looks forward. It doesn't care about your resume, your past wins, or the version of you that once felt confident. Preparation assumes something far more radical, that you are becoming someone who does not yet exist. That's why this season feels so disorienting. You keep reaching for familiar strengths, and they don't work the way they used to. Not because you're failing, but because those tools belong to an older identity. If this were a test, the pressure would feel sharp and narrow, like a spotlight demanding performance. You would feel judged, measured, compared. Instead, what you're experiencing is diffuse, almost atmospheric. It's a weight that doesn't point to a single mistake, a tension without a clear enemy. That's because preparation doesn't correct. It reconfigures. It doesn't ask, "Are you good enough?" It asks, "Can you hold what's coming without breaking yourself in the process?" Notice how the challenges you're facing aren't random. They're specific, precision crafted. They touch the exact places where you still hesitate, where you still seek control, where you still confuse effort with worth. That's not punishment, that's calibration. Life is not trying to expose your weakness, it's trying to build new capacity where weakness once lived. You are being stretched in directions you didn't choose because the future you is going to need range, not comfort. Preparation feels unfair only when you believe the story that life is supposed to be gentle. But gentleness doesn't create readiness. Think of what's happening now as an internal rewiring. Old instincts are being interrupted. Emotional shortcuts are being removed. You're being slowed down where you used to rush, isolated where you used to lean, quieted where you used to perform. None of this would be necessary if what's next was small. The intensity of the preparation is proportional to the scale of what you're stepping into. There's a paradox here that most people miss. Preparation doesn't feel empowering while it's happening. It feels like confusion, fatigue, and loss of certainty. Power comes later, when you realize you can stand in chaos without needing it to resolve immediately. When you can move without needing applause. When you can choose without needing permission. Those abilities don't come from passing tests. They come from being reshaped in spaces where there are no clear instructions and no guaranteed outcomes. You may have noticed that reassurance no longer lands the way it used to. Motivational words bounce off. Advice feels irrelevant. That's another sign you're not being tested. Tests rely on external validation. Preparation removes it. You're being trained to listen inwardly, to trust signals that don't come with proof. This is how discernment is born. This is how intuition becomes reliable. Not through certainty, but through repeated exposure to the unknown, until the unknown stops feeling threatening. And yes, there are moments when this preparation feels like erasure, like parts of you are dissolving. That's because they are. But what's dissolving isn't your essence. It's your armor, the coping mechanisms that once kept you safe but now keep you small, the identities you outgrew but kept wearing because they were familiar. Preparation strips those away, not to leave you empty, but to make you honest. What's next requires truth, not performance. So when you find yourself thinking, "Why does this feel so hard if I'm doing everything right?" Understand this: rightness has nothing to do with it. Readiness does. And readiness is not proven through success, it's forged through transformation. You are not being tested because tests end when you pass. Preparation ends when you become. And you are becoming, quietly, deeply, irrevocably, someone capable of holding what's next without losing yourself in the process. That discomfort you keep trying to explain away isn't a flaw in the process. It is the process. It doesn't arrive with a clear label or a neat instruction manual, which is why your mind keeps trying to interpret it as danger. But what you're feeling isn't a threat. It's a signal, a quiet, persistent message that something inside you is expanding faster than your identity can keep up with. And when expansion happens internally before it shows up externally, it often feels like disorientation, like being between breaths, like standing in a doorway too narrow for the person you're becoming. If this were a test, the discomfort would feel sharp and specific, like a wrong answer you could correct. You'd know what to fix, what to improve, what to stop doing. But this discomfort doesn't respond to effort. You've tried pushing through it, thinking harder, doing more, distracting yourself, and it only grows louder. That's because it's not asking for action. It's asking for permission. Permission for your nervous system to update. Permission for your expectations to soften. Permission for the old timeline to loosen its grip. There's a reason rest doesn't feel restful anymore, and busyness doesn't feel productive. You're in a recalibration phase. The internal compass you've relied on is being realigned, and until it settles, everything feels slightly off. Not wrong, just unfamiliar. This is why your intuition may feel louder but less clear, why emotions surface without obvious causes, why patience feels harder even as urgency dissolves. You're not regressing. You're transitioning. And transitions rarely announce themselves as progress while they're happening. Discomfort becomes frightening when you interpret it as a verdict. When you tell yourself it means you're lost, behind, or broken. But preparation doesn't speak in sentences, it speaks in sensations. Tightness in the chest, a sense of waiting without knowing for what, an unshakable feeling that something is rearranging beneath the surface. These sensations aren't trying to scare you. They're trying to slow you down enough to notice what's changing. The body often understands preparation long before the mind does. You might also notice a strange contradiction. Even on the hardest days, there's an undercurrent of knowing that you're not in danger. The discomfort hurts, but it doesn't feel destructive. There's a quiet steadiness beneath the turbulence, like being in rough water but somehow still floating. That's the signal. That's how you know this isn't collapse. It's adaptation. Your system is learning how to hold more sensation, more uncertainty, more possibility without shutting down. This is why forcing clarity right now feels exhausting. You're trying to extract certainty from a phase designed to loosen your dependence on it. Preparation requires ambiguity because ambiguity teaches trust. Not blind faith, but embodied trust. The kind that lives in your breath, your posture, your ability to remain present without needing immediate answers. Discomfort trains that capacity. It teaches you that you can feel unsettled and still be safe, feel unsure and still be guided. And notice this, the discomfort intensifies when you try to go backward, when you attempt to return to old habits, old relationships, old ways of defining yourself. It's not because those things are bad, it's because they no longer fit. The signal sharpens to prevent you from shrinking back into familiarity. In that sense, discomfort is protective. It guards the threshold you're standing on. It says, this way forward, even if it's unclear, that way back will cost you more than you realize. So instead of asking, how do I make this stop? Try listening for what it's refining. What capacity is being built right now? What reaction is being softened? What attachment is loosening its grip? The answers won't come as thoughts. They'll come as subtle shifts. A longer pause before reacting. A deeper breath in moments that used to overwhelm you. A growing ability to sit with yourself without distraction. These are signs of preparation at work. You are not being sentenced to discomfort. You are being trained by it. And like all training, it feels demanding before it feels empowering. But one day soon you'll realize that what once felt like restlessness has turned into steadiness. What once felt like confusion has turned into clarity that doesn't need constant reassurance. And you'll understand that the discomfort was never a warning that something was wrong. It was the signal that something profound was being made ready within you. There comes a moment in preparation when it starts to feel like things are being taken from you rather than added, And this is usually the point where the mind protests the loudest. It tells you that you're losing ground, that something has gone wrong, that you should be holding on tighter. But what's actually happening is subtler and far more intentional. What's leaving your life right now isn't being removed because it failed you, it's being released because it completed its purpose. Preparation doesn't accumulate, it clarifies. And clarification often looks like subtraction before it ever looks like gain. You may notice that certain relationships no longer resonate, even if they once felt essential. Conversations feel hollow. Shared dreams lose their charge. This isn't betrayal or ingratitude, it's alignment shifting. When your internal frequency changes, what once matched it can't always follow. Holding on out of loyalty would require you to compress yourself, and preparation refuses compression. It insists on space. Space for new insight, new responsibility, new ways of seeing that can't coexist with old agreements made by a smaller version of you. There's grief in this, even when the letting go is necessary. Preparation doesn't bypass grief. It moves through it. You're allowed to mourn what's ending without turning that mourning into a reason to stay. Loss, in this phase, isn't a sign that you chose wrong. It's proof that you're choosing forward. What's being cleared isn't being erased from your story, it's being honored and then set down so your hands are free. You might also feel the loss of motivation for goals that once defined you. Ambitions you chased relentlessly now feel strangely quiet, almost irrelevant. This can be unsettling, especially in a world that equates drive with direction. But preparation often dismantles outdated desires before revealing new ones. It removes borrowed goals, inherited timelines, and expectations you absorbed without realizing they weren't truly yours. The pause that follows isn't emptiness, it's honesty. It's the moment where desire is being purified, stripped of performance and pressure. And then there's the loss of identity itself. Roles you played effortlessly now feel heavy. Labels that once gave you confidence now feel constricting. This can feel like a personal unraveling, but it's actually an integration. You're no longer defined by what you do, who you please, or how you're perceived. Preparation loosens those definitions so your sense of self can become more resilient, less dependent on external feedback. What's being built now is an identity that can move through change without dissolving. The paradox is that as things fall away, your inner world may feel more vivid, more alive. There's a heightened sensitivity, a deeper awareness, even moments of unexpected peace. That's because clutter has been removed. When life clears space externally, it often amplifies what's internal. You start hearing your own voice again, not the one shaped by fear or obligation, but the quieter one that knows when something is true. Preparation sharpens that voice by removing distractions that once drowned it out. This clearing can make you feel exposed, like you're standing in a wide-open field without the structures that once gave you shelter. But exposure isn't vulnerability, it's readiness. You're being trained to stand without props, to trust your footing even when the landscape changes. What's next won't require you to hide behind roles or routines. It will require presence, discernment, and the ability to move lightly without dragging the past behind you. So when you feel the ache of what's missing, resist the urge to fill the space too quickly. Let it breathe, let it echo. That space is not a void, it's an invitation. Something new needs room to arrive, and it cannot land on top of what no longer fits. Preparation respects timing. It clears first, then reveals. One day you'll recognize the precision of what was removed. You'll see that nothing essential was taken, only what would have limited you later. And you'll understand that what felt like loss was actually life making room, carefully and deliberately, for a future that requires you unburdened, unencumbered, and fully present for what's next. There's a particular kind of frustration that comes from seeing the same situations repeat themselves, especially when you're certain you've already done the work. The same emotional trigger, the same type of challenge, the same dynamic wearing a different face. It can feel insulting, like life is questioning your growth or dragging you backward. But repetition in preparation isn't an accusation, it's a refinement. It's not asking whether you remember the lesson, it's checking whether the lesson has become part of you. If this were a test, repetition would mean failure. You'd be stuck retaking the same exam, correcting the same answers, hoping this time the outcome changes. But preparation doesn't care about correct answers. It cares about embodied responses. It brings the same themes back around, not to see what you think, but to see how you are. Whether your nervous system reacts the same way, whether your boundaries hold without effort, whether your sense of self remains intact when the pressure returns. You might notice that each repetition feels slightly different. Even if the storyline looks familiar, the emotional charge is lower. The recovery time is shorter. You pause before reacting where you once would have spiraled. These are not small details. They're the proof that something has shifted beneath the surface. Preparation measures progress in subtle ways, the kind that don't make for dramatic breakthroughs but create lasting stability. Mastery rarely announces itself. It reveals itself through ease. There's also a quiet mercy in repetition. Life doesn't overwhelm you with entirely new challenges when you're still integrating the old ones. It circles back with gentler force, allowing you to practice your new capacity without catastrophe. What once felt like chaos now feels manageable. What once consumed you now passes through. That's how preparation knows you're almost ready when the same storm no longer rearranges your internal landscape. This is why trying to fix recurring patterns too aggressively can slow the process. You don't need to dissect them endlessly or force a breakthrough. Often, the repetition is simply waiting for you to stay present long enough to respond differently. Not perfectly, honestly. With less self-betrayal, with less urgency to prove or defend. When that happens, the pattern loses its reason to return. It dissolves, not because you conquered it, but because it no longer has anything to teach you. There's a paradox here that can be hard to accept. Preparation doesn't end when you feel confident. It ends when you feel neutral, when situations that once defined you no longer carry the power to name you. Indifference, in this sense, isn't apathy, it's freedom. It's the moment when your energy is no longer hooked into old narratives, and life recognizes that you've integrated the lesson at a level deeper than thought. You may have expected mastery to feel like triumph, like a dramatic moment where everything clicks. Instead, it often arrives quietly, disguised as boredom or calm. You stop obsessing, you stop rehearsing outcomes, you stop needing to explain yourself. That's the signal. The repetition has done its work. The lesson has moved from the mind into the body, from awareness into instinct. And when the pattern finally fades, it doesn't leave a vacuum. It leaves capacity. Energy that was once tied up in reaction becomes available for creation. Attention that was once consumed by self-protection becomes available for vision. This is why preparation repeats itself. It's not trying to trap you. It's trying to free up the resources you'll need next. So if you find yourself thinking, why is this still happening? Listen for the deeper question underneath. How am I different now? The answer may not come in words. It may come in how quickly you return to yourself, how little you need to defend your peace, how naturally you choose alignment over familiarity. And when that shift is complete, the repetition will end without ceremony, making way for experiences that match the stability you've quietly mastered. Nothing has gone wrong. You weren't meant to rush past these moments. You were meant to live through them until they could no longer pull you out of yourself. That's when preparation gives way to access, and you step forward not because the challenge disappeared, but because you did. There is a reason this phase has grown quieter around you. Even if your inner world feels louder than ever, preparation often withdraws the noise not as a punishment, but as a necessity. Sound distracts. Applause distorts. Too many voices can interfere with the delicate work of becoming. So life lowers the volume. Fewer messages, fewer affirmations, fewer mirrors reflecting you back to yourself. At first, this silence can feel like abandonment, like being overlooked or forgotten. But silence, in preparation, is never absence. It is containment. When external validation fades, the instinct is to reach for it harder, to explain yourself, to be seen, to remind the world that you exist and matter. But preparation resists that impulse. It creates a vacuum where you are forced to encounter yourself without commentary. Who are you when no one is watching? Who are you when no one is clapping, approving, or responding? These questions aren't meant to destabilize you. They are meant to anchor you. What's next requires a self that doesn't fracture in the absence of recognition. Silence is where authority is born, not the loud kind that demands attention, but the grounded kind that doesn't need it. In the quiet, you begin to notice how much of your energy used to be spent calibrating yourself to others, adjusting tone, shrinking edges, amplifying certain traits to fit the room. Preparation interrupts that pattern. It removes the audience so you can stop performing and start inhabiting your own presence. This is why the silence can feel intimate, even uncomfortable. There's nowhere to hide from your own truth. You may find that decisions feel heavier now, not because you're unsure, but because there's no external compass to defer to. Advice doesn't land the way it used to. Opinions feel noisy rather than helpful. This is deliberate. Preparation is training you to make choices without consensus, to trust internal alignment over collective approval. When what's next arrives, there won't be time to poll the room. You'll need to move with quiet certainty, grounded in something deeper than confidence, grounded in coherence. There's also a kind of grief that surfaces in this silence, the realization that being seen was once a source of safety, and now that safety has been removed. But notice what replaces it: a steadier relationship with yourself. You begin to sense when something is off without needing to explain it. You begin to feel when something is right without needing permission to follow it. The silence sharpens your discernment. It teaches you to listen not for noise, but for resonance. This is why silence can feel like time has slowed or even stalled. Without constant feedback, there's nothing to measure progress against. No milestones, no applause breaks, just presence, just breath, just the slow accumulation of inner stability. Preparation doesn't rush this phase because it can't be simulated. You can't outsource it or optimize it. You can only inhabit it. And paradoxically, the more you settle into the silence, the less lonely it becomes. What first felt like isolation begins to feel like intimacy. You start to recognize your own rhythms, your own needs, your own boundaries. You become less reactive, less eager to fill the space with noise. You begin to understand that not everything meaningful announces itself loudly. Some things arrive as a quiet knowing that doesn't need explanation. When recognition returns, and it will, you'll meet it differently. It won't define you, it won't destabilize you. It will simply reflect what's already rooted inside. That's the gift of this quiet phase. It teaches you how to hold attention without being consumed by it, how to be seen without being shaped by the gaze of others. So if it feels like the world has gone quiet around you, don't rush to interpret that as rejection. Listen more closely. The silence is doing important work. It's strengthening your internal signal, deepening your presence, and teaching you how to stand without leaning. What's next will be loud enough on its own. For now, the quiet is preparing you to meet it without losing yourself in the noise. At last, you arrive at the threshold of what's next, and suddenly the weight of the previous revelations begins to make sense. All the shedding, all the repetition, all the silence. It wasn't preparation for a single event. It was preparation for the person you're becoming. You may feel like nothing has changed, that the world remains the same, and your life is still tangled in uncertainty, but internally the architecture has shifted. You are no longer the same consciousness that walked into this season. You are deeper, steadier, more capable of holding what is coming without being undone. There's a subtle but profound truth here. The future you are being prepared for doesn't exist without the version of you being created right now. What you're stepping toward requires a vessel that can hold possibility, intensity, and expansion all at once. This is why everything has felt paradoxical. You've been stretched where it hurt, grounded where you resisted, and silenced where you longed to be heard. That tension wasn't punishment, it was alchemy. It transformed ordinary reactions into wisdom, impulsivity into discernment, and fear into presence. What you thought were obstacles were really markers showing where growth was most necessary. It is natural to look back at the past and see mistakes, missteps, or losses, and to feel that they are stains on your path. But preparation does not accumulate errors. It cultivates experience. Each moment that challenged you, each repetition that tested your patience, each silence that demanded your attention inward, they were not wasted. They were not random. They were necessary catalysts refining your capacity to move forward with clarity and integrity. The more you embrace this paradox, the more you recognize that nothing external could have prepared you as profoundly as the internal work you were guided to do. And here is the mystical revelation. Readiness is invisible. You cannot measure it, tally it, or compare it. You cannot know exactly when the threshold will fully open, only that every subtle shift, every recalibration, has been necessary to carry you to the next stage. This is why patience, paradoxically, becomes power. The ability to inhabit uncertainty without collapsing, to trust timing without control, and to hold space for life before life delivers confirmation. This is the mark of someone truly prepared. The world will never signal your readiness in ways that feel dramatic or obvious, because readiness is an internal alignment, not a public spectacle. You may notice that opportunities feel different now. Choices present themselves with a quiet insistence rather than loud announcements. Doors open in ways that feel effortless, almost preordained, and yet they will require the full presence of the person you've been refining. That is the paradox again. What is easy externally demands mastery internally. Preparation has not been about avoiding challenges. It has been about cultivating the internal steadiness that allows you to walk through them with grace. You are no longer reactive to circumstances. You are responsive from a place of clarity. So, if you feel the subtle stirring, the sense that the next chapter is calling, lean into it. Do not rush, but do not hesitate either. Every step you take in alignment now is a signal to the universe that you are ready, that you can hold the magnitude of what is coming without fragmenting. Trust the unseen mechanics of your growth, the invisible orchestration of your preparation. Stand tall in the quiet, knowing that you are not being tested. You are being prepared, and what is next is already waiting for the version of you being born right now. And here is where I invite you to step fully into your alignment. Take a moment each day to acknowledge the progress you cannot yet see, to honor the losses and repetitions that shaped you, and to affirm your readiness for what is next. Share this journey with others who are feeling the quiet intensity of their own preparation, and lean into the practices that expand your presence. Meditation, reflection, conscious breath, and mindful action. The next chapter is not waiting, it is unfolding through you. Choose to meet it awake, aware, and fully prepared.